Hey, howdy folks. I finally bought another cheap piece of technology so I can do another review. I got spanked a little bit by that GameCube N64 HDMI cable that failed 3 weeks after I gave it a glowing review. So recovered from the burn and I'm back to do another one. I mentioned months ago that our old cheapo Black Friday TV was on the way out, and you probably noticed I put up the old projector in the bedroom. That was A, for fun, and B, because it did in fact reach the end of its lifespan. And because I'm a slow learner, I bought another TCL cheap TV. This time I went one series up from the 400 series to the 500. So not only is this a review of this TV, but I bought the S405, was our previous one, in 55 inch. And so it was a similar TV, the next series down, and a couple of years old, and it only lasted a couple of years. So I can also kind of, talk about the difference just out of the box between these two series. So the biggest reason you want to get at least the 500 series or up versus the 400 series that I got before is full array LED backlighting. So this is totally separate from organic LED, like higher end TVs have, where each bulb is the pixel. It's the whole screen array are LEDs that have complete control over their brightness and color. So that gives you the most RGB accurate picture you're going to get in current TV technologies. But full array backlight means that there is a full sheet of LEDs behind the LCDs that are actually creating the pixels, rather than LED lights shining up from the edges of the screen, which, every TV says it's an LED LCD TV, but there's actually a significant difference. And that was one of the problems, is that after a while, the controller board or whatever that decides I didn't even pull it apart and try to fix it and see what was going on. I was just like, not worth it. But the brightness for all of the lights around started to get different. They would, it was like some of them would start to get dimmer and some of them would start to get brighter, and the bulbs didn't seem to be going out. It was just a matter of, some other voltages were getting off. And it just made the picture look like crud. It looked like, an old tube TV that's going out. Whereas an array of LEDs, the bulbs themselves can go out, they can fail, but they're all just, they're shining at the same brightness. You can see it's uniform across the screen. So it creates much better picture. That's how they're able to have these technologies they talk about on the box, the super color and ultra contrast and all of that, is because it has a more uniform backlighting technology, still just using LED bulbs to shine through. Oh, come on now. Oh, hey, that looks kind of cool. I'll leave that up. But yeah, that's the main difference between the 400 series and the 500 series, is full array LED backlighting. I think it's got a slightly better processor for the built-in Roku, so the menus move faster. It definitely seemed to be faster from when I tested them in the store. But those are the big differences that you're going to notice between these. And then the final thing is cosmetic. As you can see, there's almost no bezel except on the bottom of the screen. So there's a plastic bezel around the edge of the 400 series, whereas the 500 series, like most of the higher end TVs now, they hide the bezel inside, so it looks like the screen goes almost all the way up to the edge all the way around. Other than that, there's not a huge difference in the technologies or the processing or anything being used between the cheapest TCL Roku TVs that you see on sale for every super cheap sale event for under 300, and this one, which the 50 inch here, its MSRP is $349.99. You frequently find them on sale. And then they go up in about $50 increments as you go in bigger sizes. And then I believe it's about $50 cheaper for the 43 inch. So yeah, just there's the overview and quick description of how this is different from the 400 series, which I've had for the last 2 years. So a big thing about this TV, of why maybe you have an older TV and you want to upgrade, and the sort of bullet point features that you'd be seeing, that you'd be like, oh, I want that, is HDR, high dynamic range. And there's a couple of different formats for that, HDR10 and Dolby Vision, which are both supported on this TV, and various devices will support one or the other. But HDR10 was more common on the early HDR Blu-ray players and stuff, and Dolby Vision is pretty common now. So you should be good either way. Your device should support one of those. And Dolby Vision is a fair amount better than HDR10. I'm gonna have to verse myself on the standards. But anyway, this does both of them. You should be okay for most common devices out there that support some form of HDR. But, sorry, I should have just got straight into this. A lot of you who have these series of TVs are probably using them completely without the HDR, and you have no idea because of a stupid, unintuitive design feature on these. So when you go in here, actually I can go one up to settings. We're gonna go to inputs. So by default, when you go to one of these and you go to HDMI mode, under settings, inputs, and then you go one over to the right to the settings for that input and go to HDMI mode, it will be set to auto by default. Now, you would think that auto would set to the correct mode for each one, but instead auto always sets to 1.4, which does not support HDR. So, you plug in your Xbox, your PlayStation, your Blu-ray player, whatever, and unless you go and manually set this to HDMI 2.0, it probably is defaulting to 1.4 and you're not even using the HDR on your fancy new TV. So be aware of that. You need to do this for each input. There's not just a one setting for the TV. You go settings, inputs, then go one over to the settings for that specific input, set it to HDMI 2.0, not auto, if you want to use something that uses high dynamic range. That's as simple as I can put it, but yeah, by default it is on auto and it doesn't work, and it's really stupid that out of the box it wouldn't do the thing advertised in the biggest letters on the box. I did just want to demonstrate real quick having this hooked up to something that displays what the TV supports. The Xbox One has a really good menu for this in the 4K TV details under settings and display options. But you can see here everything the TV supports. Now, of course, it supports 4K, 10-bit, HDR10, Dolby Vision, 10-bit at 60 hertz, and HDR10 for gaming. So that's, all the basic stuff that's advertised on the box. Now you'll see that I have 24 hertz turned off. This TV does say that it supports 24 hertz mode, which 24 hertz is the frame rate of the traditional film is shot in. And so a lot of programs are in 24 hertz, and it will try to, match to that for the, most perfect display of showing the exact frame rate for movies. And that feature, the TV will report that it supports it, but I've found that it doesn't look correct. It doesn't refresh the screen correctly when I've tried to use it across several devices. So I have that turned off, but everything else it shows here that it supports, it is correct that it supports all of this stuff, and your device should detect it if you have that HDMI mode set correctly for 2.0, as I displayed before. Now, as far as how content actually looks viewed in HDR on this screen, I do have to just first off say that anytime you're using HDR technologies on a non-OLED screen, on an LCD screen that's backlit, it's going to have that sort of washed out brights and muddy darks versus OLED if you're experienced with viewing it on a screen like that. So I install nice TVs and I buy cheap ones for myself, so I definitely know what the difference looks like. And it is noticeable, but if you are coming from a TV without HDR or a TV that uses edge backlighting as opposed to full array LED backlighting like the 400 series by TCL rather than this 500 series, it is significantly better. I tested a number of Xbox One games that supported HDR. Bloodstained here looks really good. Now, if you're using an Xbox One S or a base PS4 like I am, you're of course going to be subject to the games being upscaled to 4K on your screen, and they're not actually able to render in that. So that is going to affect your picture quality. But I tested a bunch of games like Ori and Bloodstained that are either 2D or limited 3D elements that don't scale down a lot in resolution. A lot of games actually go even below 1080p on the base systems. And they looked fantastic, upscaled from 1080p constant to 4K and using high dynamic range. The games looked amazing. Movies also looked excellent, both on streaming platforms in HDR and viewed from downloaded movies. Both looked excellent, and the video processing was fantastic. I would say for anything below an OLED screen, this is the best HDR I've seen among LCDs. Now, granted, I haven't gone around and tested all the cheap TVs, but just compared to the ones that were available when I bought my last cheapo Black Friday special, the HDR looks way better, and it's much, much easier to see the difference between lights and darks in video games, which is where it'll just kill you. In movies, you know, it has a kind of cool old projector look when it has that too extreme difference in the HDR, but in games it makes it unplayable. Like, you go from outside to indoors and you can't see anything, and it's totally non-functional. This resolves that to the point where it's totally playable in games, and you won't lose detail in movies, which is a huge problem with edge backlit screens. They just get muddy. So yeah, looks fantastic. I'm not going to show off a ton of footage. I'm just doing a quick and dirty review on this one, but it definitely, I would say it's the, you know, the increase you want if you're not looking to then go up into the $600-700 or more category for TVs. I apologize for the fisheye in these videos. I have a iPhone XR, and using the FaceTime camera gives me the best approximation of what the screen looks like. It has better HDR and everything, but it has a forced fisheye effect, which is really annoying. So yeah, anyone with an iPhone XR understands, but sorry about that. I'm gonna just show off the Dolby video, which does a pretty good job of showing off the HDR. Now, I'm doing this in daytime, but in a not extremely bright room, to give you an idea of about what it's like to be in the room with it. And also, hopefully it'll pick up the sound pretty decently. I usually don't even bother saying anything about flat panel sound because it's always garbage, and you should always get at least a sound bar. So here we go. So there you go. That is unfortunately the best I can do with the tools available to me to show what it looks like without you going into the showroom and looking at one. But you also could probably see my reflection pretty good. There is some glare. It's a gloss screen, so that's, you know, realistic. It's not just the camera. It looks like that standing in the room. But that was the best approximation I can get of, you know, what it's like actually viewing it. So to close out and conclude on this, I would say, you know, even if you pay the full MSRP of $350 and you don't get it on one of the frequent sales, it's definitely a good step up from the cheapest of the cheap 4K TVs out there to get the next series up, and not even just by TCL. You'll notice any of these companies, Hisense, TCL, the other cheaper brands that you always see in the big TV sales, they usually have one that's a step up. It's basically like the TV the engineers designed, and then the one that gets sold super cheap at Costco and Sam's Club and stuff is the one that the executives insisted on, that was cut down a bunch to hit a price point even lower than that, where, you know, the engineers were like, that's not even worth it. Like, we shouldn't even make that. And they're like, whatever, $299, everyone's gonna buy it. Short version, the one that's $50 more, totally worth it. We'll see if this one lasts longer. I know I'm a complete fool buying a TV of the same brand of a TV I had that lasted less than 2 years, but I did get the absolute cheapest of the cheap. And also, as an installer, this is not BS. I have noticed before that the TVs that are sold during big sales events are actually different than the ones sold all year round. I found that they have less features, sometimes less ports. They find just demented ways to cut a few more pennies off the cost. And it in some ways, there was a TV one time that I tried to do a setup for with someone, and it had no sound output of any kind. It just, no sound output. No headphone jack, no optical, no audio return channel through an HDMI, no Bluetooth, nothing. You had to use the TV speakers, and that was like, they cut out a headphone jack is the cheapest way you can do that. It's like a 4-cent part when you're making something in Asia. And yeah, so there's a reason that those are so cheap, and I'm hoping that by just stepping up to the next one, I get longevity. But immediately out of the box with just quality, the effort they put into making it look nice versus not caring at all, design of the features and how it works. Besides that dumb thing I mentioned about how the default auto setting for HDMI never seems to engage HDMI 2.0 on any device and allow HDR, you just have to manually set it. Other than that, the design of this is pretty good. Partnering with Roku and using that instead of their own interface is definitely a good idea. In general, I guess I'm saying, if you want to get a cheap TV, step up the $50 from the base models, and I'm pretty happy with this. I'm a guy that, I install all kinds of electronics, and I've definitely installed the best of the best, Samsung curved monitors with all the cool stuff, and I've looked at them, I've tuned them, I've tested them a whole bunch. I know exactly what the difference is. And I'm a cheapskate. I've said this over and over again. I'm often willing to settle with less, well, always willing to settle with less than what my customers will. But I'm definitely very happy with this, especially having had the lowest low model, the 400 series, the one that's $50 less for each size. That TV I was ultimately disappointed with in a ton of ways, especially the backlighting technology, and how frustrating some of the settings were to get working and things like that. Just that extra step up has made me a lot more satisfied out of the box. So I can't tell you if this TV is going to have better longevity than the previous TCL one, but right here I can tell you, it wasn't that long ago, it was less than 2 years ago. I pulled that one out of the box, I tested it, I set it up, I felt what the ports felt like when I plugged stuff in and out of it, the sheen of the plastic, everything was significantly worse on that TV, to the point where it's like, I often notice it's like you can always see when you went one step too far down in price. And that was clearly evident in the 400 series by TCL. Whereas the 500 series, the real difference between this and a $500 to $600 Vizio or Sony or any of those, pretty much until you get into OLED, it's not there for you to just see it right out of the box. It'll be in quality and longevity is where I'll see if I should have spent at least $500 or $600 and got a Sony or a Samsung or an LG or something. So yeah, at the moment I'm saying buy, recommend on the TCL 500 series. I think it looks fantastic to me compared to the other cheap ones that I've looked at in the price range. I've been real happy with this so far. So yeah, recommend.